So, there's actually a really good movie based on the first Yakuza game. As we all know, film adaptations of games are almost always a wash. Most of them are just awful. Far Cry, Postal, Doom, Alone in the Dark, Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Hitman, Max Payne. All of them could totally have great film adaptations, some of them knowingly campy a la Evil Dead 2, some of them genuinely fantastic art films. But unfortunately, film adaptations of games just aren't something that the world seems interested in taking seriously. However, I've heard whispers that Takashi Miike's Yakuza Like a Dragon is at least one exception to the rule. Let's see how true this is. I should specify now that Yakuza isn't a series that really needs a floaty artistic film devoted to it. The games perfectly ride the line between genuinely emotional and thought-provoking and knowingly campy, which means it's already perfectly poised to be a great grab a beer and watch this with your friends movie. With that in mind, I won't be docking points whatsoever for being cheesy. That's what I'm hoping for. So, looking at what I love so much about the Yakuza games, let's set some goals for this film. First off, it needs to be funny, but a special kind of funny that's made up of dramatic irony, eccentric characters, occasionally stupid dialogue, ridiculous violence, and genuinely well set up jokes. Yakuza is a hilarious series, and its comedy is broad. Everything from dick jokes to meta-commentary to well-timed deliveries makes up Yakuza's comedy. Secondly, it needs to have genuine character arcs and insane but reasonable plot twists happening fairly often. Yakuza has always teetered on the line of the type of game I'd like to do a video on, because while terms like ludonarrative harmony don't really belong anywhere near Yakuza, every game really does feel like it has a message it wants to share, one that tends to get lost in a sea of side missions that aren't usually relevant to that message. Thirdly, it needs to be ridiculously violent. There have been plenty of moments in the Yakuza series that had me visibly cringing because my character just used such a brutal attack on an enemy, or something so painful looking happened in a cutscene. The violence can absolutely be comedic, but above even that, it needs to be brutal. Might as well throw in now that fantastic, but not necessarily realistic, fight choreography is also a huge part of why this brutality works for me. Fourthly, it needs to feel like it's capturing Japanese culture in a diverse, interesting, and sometimes comedic way. I haven't been to Japan, I'm not an anime fan, I don't listen to much Japanese music, and I only have sushi like 4 times a year. But as a foreigner, Yakuza feels incredibly authentic in the way it portrays Japan when you're just walking around town, watching cars cruise around, stopping at a restaurant to grab some gyoza. It all feels very believable, but in this caricature-inspired still life kind of way. Lastly, and I know this sounds strange, it needs to make me smile without telling a joke. Yakuza is loaded with moments where I smile, not because of something funny happening, but because I'm happy for how one of the characters' life is going. Or I get to see a moment where 2 characters I like are really getting along, or a scene that will perfectly showcase what I love about a character. I want the best for characters like Kiryu and Majima and Saejima, and when I see that they're happy, I'm happy. It's as simple as that. While this may seem arbitrary to actual film critics, this is what I'm going to be judging the film based on. In this context, I don't care about use of color or pacing or script economy or whatever. From Yakuza, I just want a film that takes me on a wild ride while meeting the criteria above. Before we start this film, I should clarify that it's a loose adaptation of the plot of the first game, Yakuza and or Yakuza Kiwami. So if you have any interest in the series based on what I've said above, I highly recommend playing at least the game before you watch this video or the film. Well, without further ado, let's do it. So, I just watched the film, it was pretty good. It's definitely the best film adaptation of a game I've ever seen, and take that as the massively qualified statement it is. I guess the best way to approach this is to just give you all an introduction, then we can just go over the 5 goals I'd set for the film before I watched it. I absolutely wouldn't recommend this film to someone who isn't already a fan of the Yakuza series, and that's simply because it starts around the second act of Yakuza 1's plot. We never hear about Kiryu and Nishiki's relationship, we don't see that Nishiki was still in love with Yumi, or that Kiryu took the blame for Sohei Dojima's murder. The whole point of Yakuza 1 was Kiryu learning that feelings and the Yakuza lifestyle mix like water and oil, and the simple idea that absolute power corrupts absolutely. This arc in Kiryu was brought across by Kiryu's interaction with Kazuma and Nishiki over the course of the game, and him seeing a reflection of himself in Haruka. But since none of these characters got a proper introduction, or even all that much screen time, that's more or less completely lost in the film, and it turns into a film that's simply about how money influences people in dangerous ways. I mean, since we never learned about Nishiki's relationship with Yumi, we don't even learn why the Tojo clan suddenly has $10 billion. So, yeah, if you don't already know all of these things from playing Yakuza 1, the plot will make absolutely no sense to you. If you do know the plot of Yakuza 1, Goto Majima and Haruka will be absolutely great, as they're captured pretty much perfectly in the film. But Kiryu, Date, and Nishiki don't really feel like their original selves whatsoever, and that will definitely annoy Yakuza fans. Kiryu, being the main character of Yakuza, feels like the biggest annoyance to me. He actually comes off as a bit selfish and like an anti-hero, whereas I like him so much in the games because he's a protagonist I can 100% get behind. I mean, in this film, we see Kiryu kill at least 5 people, as opposed to his perfect quote-unquote non-lethal track record that he has in the games. This is made even worse since the film never explained that he was innocent and took the blame for Nishiki's crime. From what we learn in the film, he was just a guy who was in prison for 10 years and has a lot of enemies trying to kill him. But a perfect recreation of Yakuza isn't really what I was expecting. Sure, the plot is muddied and the characters are off, but really, almost everything else was spot on, and that was enough for me to have a fantastic time with the film. So, let's go over these goals I set for the film one by one. First off, is it funny? This was a major one for me. If the film had a bad sense of humor, it wouldn't have worked for me, period. However, it actually captures a lot of Yakuza's sense of humor really well. A great combination of slapstick, over-the-top plot developments, characters who are eccentric as hell, I'm looking at you, Majima, and just funny situations in general. Scenes like this, where this greeter is extremely concerned that Kiryu is bringing a child with him into the bathhouse, is classic Yakuza. And the same goes for this fantastic Majima moment, where he hijacks his own ambulance to bring him back to Kiryu for one last showdown. I loved this scene when Kiryu seems defeated, and then he drinks his Staminon Spark, and the Nishikiyama family starts to back off from him, scared. All of the early scenes with this couple were great, where the girl is just sort of stringing the guy along in this crazy robbery scheme she's hatched. It's just good stuff, and I was laughing pretty consistently through the whole film. Secondly, another big one for me was that I really wanted the film to have strong character arcs and crazy plot twists happening left and right, as that is classic Yakuza stuff. And I'm sad to say that this one gets a strong negatory. The closest we get to having a character arc is, fittingly, in Haruka, since she learns to be independent after searching for her mother for so long. It's just a shame that her motivation in all of this is never really set up. In fact, the order of events here is kind of reversed. Kiryu is looking for Mizuki purely because Haruka knows she works at Serena, whereas in the game, Kiryu is just trying to meet up with Mizuki to touch base when he finds that she's been killed and Haruka was the sole survivor of the shootout. This was a fantastic way to introduce Haruka and her motivation in the game, but as I said, she's pretty much got no introduction in the film. In the game, Kiryu's character arc came from him trying to help Haruka find her mother and learning that they'd both been burned by the ability Desire has to corrupt people. Haruka's father, Jingu, left Yumi for a more profitable marriage, and Nishiki betrayed the Tojo clan and Kiryu to try to pay for her sister's heart transplant. However, in the film, none of this is explained, and so Kiryu's arc is non-existent unless you already know what's going on. The second closest we get to having a full-fledged character arc is with this young couple and their robbing spree. Yui, the girl, got herself into horrible debt, and this leads to her killing her debtor and getting herself killed in the process. While this storyline is entirely original and has no parallel in Yakuza 1, it would have actually tied in really well with the themes of the game, but unfortunately those themes just aren't explored in the film. So, entertaining as it is, and as good an actor as Seiko Dokyu is, her storyline is just dead air from a thematic perspective. And, of course, seeing as he's got about 6 minutes of screen time in the film, Nishiki doesn't really have an arc either. In the game, Nishiki's trying to take control of his destiny, after Kiryu gave so much of his life to correct Nishiki's mistake, but is ultimately killed in the end as a result of being unwilling to accept what he truly can't change. That is to say, Yuka's death. However, in the film, he just sort of blows up, and we don't really know why, because it never shows anything going on with Yumi. We don't even know that she's had such a long history with Nishiki and Kiryu. So yeah, that just further explains why I wouldn't recommend this to someone who hasn't played the first Yakuza or its remake without knowing all of this information beforehand. You will be completely lost as to the general story of this film and almost every single character's motivations. However, back to a happier note, this film is gloriously violent in all the right ways, all thanks to Majima. It even includes one of those, oh man, that's brutal enough to make me cringe moments, when Majima is torturing the info broker in this scene. We even see these marks on the poor guy's foot, which is just made to feel even more like Yakuza when we finally learn that this character is a masochist, and that Majima's torture actually was acceptable payment for the information. We see tons of good old-fashioned beatdowns where Majima's entire family is nervous to say anything around him, because if they answer one of his questions wrong, or are just in the wrong place at the wrong time, they're going to get utterly brutalized by his classic baseball bat. I mean, just look at how he drags one of his wounded cronies with him to pitch a couple baseballs towards the end here. These guys are so afraid of Majima that they would do absolutely anything for him, which is exactly how the power dynamic has always worked in the Majima family. Kiryu, on the other hand, isn't quite as brutal as he is in game. I mean, Christ, how could you be? My personal favorite brutal Kiryu moment in the film is also a fantastic Majima moment, towards the end of their first proper fight at the Yoshida Batting Center. And hey, we even get some really fun fight choreography, such as in Kiryu's first fight at this puppo. This point doesn't need much further explanation. Since we're working with real actors here, the film couldn't possibly be as violent as the game without tripling its budget. And for a 2-hour film, rather than a 100-hour-long game, a torture scene would have just stolen the limelight and put my attention at the wrong aspects. Without having an utterly insane budget, I'd say that the film does a pretty fantastic job at capturing the feeling of Yakuza's violence, save for Kiryu being only kind of a badass as opposed to the Dragon of Dojima. As a side note, the whole use CGI to put a heat mode effect on characters thing is a step too far in my eye. Sure, it's kind of fun, but all it really does is remind me that these actors aren't actually punching each other, which is one big hurdle that this film had to come across. As the game can of course show any amount of violence it works, and as much detail as it wants, without needing to fake anything. So, on to my fourth goal for the film, capturing Japanese culture in a diverse, interesting, and sometimes comedic way. Again, I haven't been to Japan, and I don't know nearly as much about the culture as some, but the Yakuza series still feels incredibly authentic to me, while still being lovably over the top in places. This ranges from simple stuff like the game showing all the food you can eat in serious detail, to broader stuff like the inclusion of a minigame based around the sex industry, the huge population density we see, the way that it seems like every inch of Kamurocho has an advertisement for something or another on it, the etiquette we see the generic convenience store clerks and restaurant hosts adopting. Yakuza 0 even fills certain streets with NPCs who will give you practically useless pocket tissues if you talk to them. I could go on forever with how many Yakuza games there are and how detailed they all are. The point is that these games paint a clearer picture of Japanese culture than any other piece of media I've come across, while still being over the top and funny about it in just the right places. Such as with characters like Tsuchimo in Judgment, who's happily decided that he's going to spend the rest of his life in this internet cafe. So, how does the film handle this? Very, very well, considering it's about 2 or 3% the length of your average Yakuza game. One thing I especially enjoyed was how they recreated the fictional Kamurocho in the real world. In the opening credits of the film, we get to see the gate at the bottom of Tenkaichi Street. We see Theater Square and Pink Street, a Papo location, Beam, Katabuki Drugs. And I'm not even sure how they did this. Maybe it was special effects. Maybe Kamurocho isn't as fictional as I thought. But we get this flyover shot towards the end, which, as any Yakuza fan will recognize, is almost a one-for-one recreation of the layout of Kamurocho. Stuff like this is going to be super fun for any Yakuza fan. I can just imagine watching this with friends and pointing it out every time you see a location or building from the game. Maybe you can make a drinking game out of it. We get the funny, over-the-top sexual stuff, like how this info broker who Majima tortures is smiling through his entire torture scene, because, as we learn later, he's a masochist. And one thing I thought was particularly interesting was the Heatwave plotline. I don't remember this ever being mentioned in Yakuza 1, but a big part of the plot to this film is that it's the hottest day in recorded history in Tokyo during the film. And so we get to see a lot of people who have been pushed to their wits' end by the heat. This actually allows us to get a more candid look at the social dynamics between all of these characters, with things like this waiter constantly interrupting the police to offer them drinks, and everybody desperately staring at the AC unit, hoping it doesn't fail on them. That sort of stuff. By putting these characters in a unique situation, we get to see a sharper image of how they all interact with each other, which really helps to paint a picture of the social dynamics of the Japanese workforce in a fast way, which is good because, again, this film is only 2 or 3% the length of your average Yakuza game. I'm gonna move on from this topic before I say something stupid, as again, I really don't know much about Japanese culture. That fact alone is why I haven't made a proper video on one of these games yet. I feel like I'd need to spend a year in Japan to say the things I want to say about the series. So, on to my last hope for the film, that it'd be able to make me smile outside of the actual jokes, and knock this one out of the park. So, let me just clarify what I mean by this. I'll draw from a moment in Judgment, a side game in the Yakuza series. The brash but reliable Kaito is running away from some thugs with Yagami and friends, when a little slip of the tongue has him awkwardly tripping over his words for a second. This probably won't have much of an effect on you if you haven't played Judgment, because it's not exactly a funny joke. But watching this, all I can think is, yep, typical Kaito. And of course I crack a smile at that. Seeing this just plain brightened my mood. No laughing, just a sharp exhale and a smile. This film has a whole lot of stuff like this. The characters are all really underdeveloped, but we often get little glimpses into who the characters really are. That is to say, who they are in the game. Such as after Majima's second time being defeated by Kiryu when he's just laying on the ground and says, or when Kiryu is waxing philosophical to Haruka when she assumes her mother is dead. Or when we see that Majima has a little sign he flips to show that he's at his favorite hangout spot, the batting cages. It really is like hanging out with your friends, and one of them does something that's so typical of them that you just have to smile because you like the person. It's a really warm feeling, and one that I think comes best from a series as long-running as Yakuza. I mean, I've only played 7 of the 9 games in this series so far, not counting remakes and non-canon side games, and I've probably put about 600 hours at least into the series. I've had a lot of time to get to know these characters, so when I see good old Majima bashing in heads and being crazy as ever, it's endearing as all hell, and the film definitely captures at least a bit of that. A particular favorite of mine is when Haruka tells Majima that she'll kill him if he kills Kiryu, and Majima just replies with, This is totally something Haruka and Majima would say, but that does remind me of one tiny issue. Majima isn't really an antagonist in Yakuza 1. He wants to fight Kiryu, sure, but even if Kiryu lost one day, I don't think Majima would kill him. They just have more of a friendly rivalry. I mean, the footage I'm showing now is Majima getting ready to play Pocket Circuit with Kiryu in the remake of the game that this film is based on, but that's just a minor thing. So, this film fulfilled 4 of my 5 goals for it. It lived up to 4 of the 5 reasons I love Yakuza storytelling, which means that I'd have to give it a 4 out of 5 stars. Judging a work of art with a number, however, is really silly, so let me just sum up my thoughts real quick. Could have been a lot better, but it's still a damn good time. If you're a Yakuza fan, you'll absolutely want to watch it next time you get a chance. Some of the retcons and skip story beats will definitely annoy you, but the tone, the atmosphere, the action, and let's be real here, Majima, makes it well worth your time. As for non-Yakuza fans, I have no idea why you're still watching this video, but since you are, go play Yakuza. Until you do, you will get absolutely nothing from this film, save for a handful of good action scenes, good visuals, and some nice music. Without knowing these characters though, those things are nowhere near enough to carry this film. Even if you're just looking for a dumb action movie, the omissions from the plot will just leave you confused. However, even with all of that said, it's still the best film adaptation of a game I've ever seen.
ALUF Kazumaが無職